Greetings. Thanks for joining me today. What I wanted to share with you comes from, we'll call him Caleb. Caleb just got back from an attempted moose hunt, and it was an attempted hunt because of what I'm going to share with you. He got a hold of me night before last, and when he called me, he had just gotten in from this experience and was pretty freaked out. So I had him explain what happened, and I had him call back after he calmed down a little bit, just so he didn't gloss over any details, because a lot of people will get caught up and not remember everything immediately. So after a couple conversations, he got back a hold of me. Now, what happened with Caleb is he borrowed his stepdad's four-wheeler, and he had been to this spot south of the Denali Highway once or twice, not far from Swede Lakes. It's a place of many encounters, actually. So he went back in there, and he went alone. And he realized almost immediately the folly in that thought, that line of thinking of I could do everything alone. And he was a younger guy, and he fully admitted he took on more than he could chew alone. So he drops down to the North Fork of the Golcana from that high ridge on the Swede Lake side, which would be the north side of the North Fork. Once he gets down to the bottom, that basically starts that shanty town, and he said there wasn't as many people there as he initially thought there was going to be. So what he did is he crossed and started going down out towards the alphabets. Now, he said once he came up onto the upper plateau from the little valley there, this little upper plateau, you get into basically the Alphabet Mountains, which are a series of really high buttes, and he gets up in there, and he decides he's going to wheeler back up to one of these buttes and camp at the bottom of it, because the last time he was there, he saw a lot of activity as far as game in that area. He spotted a couple bull moose from that perch, many caribou, and so he decided that's what he was going to do. He had it all, figured out in his mind. So he gets back up in there, and this is a journey that took multiple hours. It's not like he just unloaded and all of a sudden he was right there. No, it's quite a journey. Multiple hours by four-wheeler, and the weather had been utter shit. So he finally gets back up in there, and he got himself a fire going, and it was just after dark once he got basically set up. He was just using a little two-man pop tent. He was going, light and just get in and out was his thought process. So he goes to bed that night after eating and, tending to the fire a little bit. Where he was, it wasn't raining horribly hard, so he tried to set up the fire to where it would burn all night, at least to have some embers in the morning to rekindle the fire easily instead of fighting a bunch of wet wood. So he went to sleep, and he said he doesn't know what time it was exactly when he first heard the initial noise that woke him up. He said it sounded like something big walking along the rocks near where he was, and it immediately woke him up because he was scared of bears. He sits up and he listens, and he tries to figure out what direction, what exactly he's hearing, and so forth. So as he's sitting there thinking about it and trying to listen, he decides he grabs his flashlight. He's using a 7mm mag, and he unzips the tent and goes out and starts beaming around, doesn't see anything. Now, when he steps out of the front of the tent, to his immediate right is the beginnings of this basically sheer drop from, it's actually a wall beside him of rock. And to his left, it drops down little steps like, kind of like a declining rise down to these alders and willows. So he looks off to the left, and he sees nothing at first, and he's panning back and forth, and he could hear a real low grunting. He said the grunting reminded him almost of like an elk when it initially gets startled, but we don't have any elk up here, at least not in that area. I know there's some of the Roosevelt herd down southeast and whatnot, and some over by Kodiak on Raspberry Island or whatever. Anyway, none up here. So he's kind of confused, and he doesn't know what to make of it. So he figures, okay, it must be a moose sound I've never heard. They're going into the rut. It's probably something along those lines. So he kind of looks around a little bit, decides, all right, you know what, I'm going to rekindle this fire. Since I'm up anyway, I can get an earlier start than what I was going to. So he gets the fire going, gets it nice and bright, and he's, warming up some coffee and doing some various things, getting ready. And he has his rifle laying on the rear rack of the four-wheeler, which is 5 feet from the fire. And as he's sitting there, he's kind of resting, leaning back against the rack. He didn't want to hunt for his stump to sit on that he had put behind the tent under some tarp so it didn't get wet. As he was sitting there, just kind of leaning against the rack and just kind of yawning, stretching, sipping on some coffee, he hears this grunt again. And so he had his flashlight right beside him. He just immediately turns it on and starts beaming around. And initially he catches a little bit of eye shine. And he said it was just the slightest, almost like as soon as the light hit the eye, it shielded its view. And he thought that was weird because typically, you beam a moose or anything like that, it's just kind of like, we'll just look at you. But again, he just chalked it up to a moose turning its head when he turned on the light. Now, he goes back over the fire and he's stoking the fire. And he said as he took about the second step from the wheeler and was just leaning over to add a piece of wood, he heard a very low guttural growl. He said that the rocks he was standing on, they were broken up and stuff, almost shale-like. He said he felt the growl in his feet when he felt that growl. He said it was barely audible, but you could feel it. And so immediately he lunges back, grabs a hold of his rifle off the rear rack, and he starts beaming around again. This time he sees the eye shine again, but about 50 yards further away and just at the edge of, the realistic use of his beam, the lumens of his beam. It didn't have enough candela to penetrate the darkness enough to make out anything other than some eye shine. However, he did say that the eye shine was big and it was pretty wide set as far as the eyes. It was at a distance. He couldn't say for sure, how many inches the eyes were apart, but he could tell it was large. He didn't realize how large until it got a little lighter, and I'll explain that. So he's holding the rifle and the flashlight, and he's yelling out, hey, hunter over here, hunter over here. He didn't know what he was dealing with, so in case it was another hunter coming through, he was just making it obvious, like it wasn't, I mean, in his words, he had a tent, a fire, and a wheeler right there. Any other human would have recognized that and at least answered back. Nothing. The eye shine goes away. He hears some movement and just kind of sits there and waits and kills the flashlight, keeps his back to the fire, and he's trying to acclimate his eyes to night vision, better overall night vision, or at least low light vision. And as his eyes are adjusting, he hears movement, but it doesn't come in. It's at a distance, always at a distance, he said, but it seemed to be the same distance, roughly 50 yards. So as Caleb is sitting there pondering his, what he's going to do, he keeps calling out periodically, hey, who's there? Hunter over here. And he doesn't want to continue doing this because he wants to be ready bright and early to potentially bag a moose that morning. And if he's sitting there yammering and jacking his jaw all night, it's going to, alert all the game around that, hey, there's a human over there. So he quiets down after a little bit, and he decides, maybe I'm just going to do my breakfast in a pouch thing, little MRE type deal, and then just pack up and do my hunt and get out of here. So he's doing his little MRE meal, and he's heating it up on one of those stereo burners, and he's getting it, he's getting it all prepared and everything. And as he's dropping this stuff into his little pot, he's realizing that there's a smell, and he thought it was like a bad, it actually wasn't an MRE, I apologize, it was one of those freeze-dried meals. So he thought it was something wrong with the the meal, the prepackaged freeze-dried meal, because of the weird smell he was dealing with. He was like, gosh, and he kept smelling it, and it smelled fine, but then when he'd pull his head away, he'd smell that odor. So he lets it do its thing, and he starts paying attention to the sounds because he was a little bit distracted getting breakfast going or whatever. So as he's sitting there, he hears that low rumbling growl again, and this time it's a lot closer. He said by time he could turn around, grab the flashlight off the ground, he heard 3 steps, almost, he said it had to have been within 10 yards of him, and he should have been able to see whatever it was by how loud and how he felt the thumps in the ground. Meanwhile, this is simultaneous with that growl. He said the growl continued, thump, thump, thump. As he backed up, turned on the flashlight, and is wielding his rifle, he sees nothing. He backs off a little bit more because he's got that wall behind him, that sheer face of a cliff wall behind him, and he's trying to determine what's coming near me, what's following me, what is this thing doing, what is it? As he's doing so, his flashlight is starting to crap out on him. He needs to change the batteries, and now his night vision has been compromised by the flashlight being brighter than the fire and so on, because he had let the fire start to die down because he was going to be leaving soon and just use his little burner to heat up his meal. So now he's like, well, crap, let me get these batteries changed. So he's got the rifle across his lap, and he's trying to put in new batteries. First time he put one in upside down, had to fix it. Meanwhile, while he's fumbling and jumbling around, he hears this thing a little further away than what was initially the steps that went by with the growling. And he turns on the flashlight, and he's not seeing anything. And so his heart rate, he said, is jacked. Caleb's in his mid-20s. He's, outdoorsman. He's been, jogging, running, all that stuff. So he could feel his blood pressure in his eyes. I mean, he from what he said, he could feel his heartbeat in his eyes. His heart was pounding so hard. As he's beaming around, he catches a glint of the eye shine again about 30 yards away, off to his left-hand side. Now, as he's looking at this eye shine, all of a sudden, this hellacious, loud, he said it was very high-pitched. He said it was almost as high-pitched as a tea kettle whistling. Just super high-pitched, woman-like scream just coming right at him. He said it was so loud it hurt his ears. So much so that he found himself trying to turn his head and putting one hand over his ear, trying to cup that ear and block it from the piercing noise. And as soon as that scream stopped, he said it lasted about 20 to 22 seconds-ish, something like that. As soon as that stopped, he heard the footsteps again, thump, 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 and they were going away. He beams the light in that direction and notices a dark silhouette off in the distance moving away. So he's like, crap. He finishes what he's doing. He's no longer hungry. He just dumps the meal out on the ground and gets the pot clean, shuts off the burner, starts letting it cool off, and he's slowly packing his stuff, keeping his eyes in the direction of that noise and the silhouette he saw. Gets everything packed up, and very quickly, he said he rolled his tent up, bungee corded around it. He didn't give a crap if it was packed right or not. Was latching everything down to the four-wheeler real fast. Meanwhile, when he was going back and forth grabbing, and again, he went really light, so it's not like he had a whole crap ton to load up. But when he was going back and forth, each time he would kick more rocks and dirt on his fire to make sure it was getting smothered. He goes back over to the wheeler. He's got the rifle in his lap, and he fires up the wheeler, getting ready to leave. And it's at this point where he said it's starting to get light on the horizon. So that light on the horizon made him calm down a little bit because he really didn't want a wheeler in the dark out of there. So he said he sat still and waited on daylight. And once it got daylight enough for him to easily see the trail, but the trees were still silhouetted, he started his journey out of there. He said when he was going down the trail, backtracking the way he came up, because he basically had to make his own trail from a lower trail to get up to that little rise. He said it was when he was going down that, he had his rifle in a gun holder on the front rack of the wheeler. And as he was going down, he noticed something dark cross the trail in front of him, just out of the way of the little headlights on the four-wheeler. He said the headlights he had on it were crap. They barely worked. But he saw enough to see this dark thing cross the trail. So immediately he brakes. He turns on his flashlight. He's beaming around. And he sees nothing. And so he's got his rifle out of the rack. He's just sitting there kind of staring around into the darkness with the flashlight, holding the rifle, looking for any movement, any sound of noise. Nothing. He sits down and continues to drive slow with one hand holding the rifle, and it's a hard thing to do. But he was freaking out. He wasn't sure what the hell was going on just yet. He'd been dealing with the high-pitched scream. He'd been dealing with the noises of the grunts, the groans, the growls, the sounds of the footsteps. So he's really out of his element when he's dealing with this stuff. He also said that smell that he initially smelled had not stopped. It continued from when he was trying to make his meal to after he dumped it out, when he was getting everything going to get out of there. The smell, he said, was almost like it was following him. The smell itself was following him, like it stuck to him or something. So him being on edge, to say the least, he got down to the bottom of that trail where he had broken off from a lower trail, and he let a shot off in the air. Boom! Just to make it known that he had something. No sooner than he did that, he said about 60 yards away, he heard thrashing running through the brush like it was coming towards him. So immediately he racks another round into the rifle and points the flashlight in that direction. And he said when he beamed in that direction, the movement, the sound of the movement coming towards him stopped. He's beaming over there. All of a sudden, this thing stood up and was looking at him. And he said he just came through that brush, and he knew that brush was over his head by at least almost a foot. And so he was riding on the back of the wheeler at another foot of that. So roughly, the brush was about 6 foot tall. That's a rough guesstimation. It's not an approximate. It's not an exact. But this thing was 3 to 4 foot taller than that, looking at him. And he said it looked like it was a brownish black color, kind of grizzled, but he couldn't make out the face. All he could see was the eye shine. He said the eye shine seemed to fluctuate between green and then red, which is odd. Normally it's one color or another, but this seemed to fluctuate between green and red. And he's just staring, and he's not knowing what to do. He's kind of stuck in shock. As he's beaming at this thing, he has the rifle, but he doesn't want to shoot, and this thing lets out another scream. And he said he couldn't make out exactly what the teeth looked like. He could just tell it was showing its teeth, but what it had done was opened its mouth real wide. He said it looked like it disfigured its face when it opened its mouth to let out that high-pitched scream again. He said when it let out the high-pitched scream, he immediately shot in the air again. And once he did that, he said it dropped out of sight into the alders and the willows, and he heard it thrashing and running away. And he said once he heard it get to a satisfied distance for him to not focus on it, he turned around and just hauled ass as quick as he could, as safely as he could, out of there. He went back around, dropped back down towards the North Fork of the Golcana, and when he got down there by where the shantytown was starting, he asked a couple people that were up and moving if they had heard the scream, and they said yeah, they said they heard the scream. And he just continued and made his way out of there, and that was basically the end of what he dealt with. He asked me to ask anyone listening, if you were out that way and heard those screams, if you could contact me and I could put you in contact with Caleb. He would like to talk to you about the area and what he dealt with. But anyway, that's what Caleb dealt with. He had a visual sighting. This thing was within 100 yards. His face deforming when it opened its mouth really wide, he said, was one of the creepier than the scream. Because he said it almost looked like his face was imploding as its mouth got wider. He said it was the damnedest thing. So anyway, I want to thank Caleb for reaching out. He was still really freaked out when he called me. And just hunters beware, beware while you're out there. You never know. It's so random in nature. Out of all the hunters out there, who knows how many others had to deal with what Caleb did, but just be aware. And again, I want to thank him. And soon there will be I did an interview with a guy named Gabe from Hawaii. I thought it was very interesting. I haven't heard many things about Hawaii, so I'm just going to showcase a Hawaiian episode here in the near future. And thanks, and